In this unit, we're going to be looking at what are fungi. So you've probably seen these guys around. If you are somebody who is like me, you like to eat fungus. So most people think about mushrooms when they think about fungus. But really what fungi are any spore producing organism that feeds on organic matter. So fungi are actually more like us than they are like plants. So they have to eat other organisms in order to get their food, and they're going to actually reproduce by making spores, which we'll see in a video here in a little bit. Look. So, who are the fungi? Well, we've got lots of different types of fungi. The ones that most people think about are these guys right here, the ones that make mushrooms. In fact, this whole group of pictures that are here that I borrowed from online, none of these are mine. These are all the same kinds of group of mushrooms. They all produce these mushroom type structures, but you can see that they come in all different shapes and sizes. So everything from that classic mushroom to this one that looks like a star. We've got something that looks more like a sponge. And this one just looks like a Muppet to me. So we've also got ones that appear to bleed, lots and lots of different options. Over here are what we call the sac fungus, because they make a sac type structure inside of their body, but a lot of them have kind of cup type structures or club type structures that are the spore producing portion of the fungus. There's a whole group of these guys that are microscopic. In fact, all of the ones that are down here along the bottom are microscopic. These two are part of what we call the catricid fungi. You may have heard of these as the frog killers. And so there are some of these ones that are infecting frogs. Most of the catrichids are going to be parasites. This one right here is actually pretty famous. This is penicillin. Well, I'm sorry, this is Penicillium. The genus is Penicillium, and this is the one that we use to make penicillin. And then this one right here is pretty famous as well. This is a fungus. It is the only single-celled fungus. This is yeast. And so this is the one that we use to make bread and beer and wine and other alcoholic spirits. So lots of variety, as you can see, for the fungi. Lots of different body shapes, lots of different sizes. So what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to comment on this slide and just go out online and search for weird fungi. I'd like you to post a comment of what your favorite weird fungi was that you found. And if you can, link a website or a picture to it as well, so that way the rest of us can take a look at what you found, because there are some really weird ones, lots of different colors and shapes. So most of them that you're going to find are going to be of what we call the fruiting bodies, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. So as I mentioned, fungi are more closely related to us, the animals, than they are to plants. And a lot of that has to do with how they get their energy. So fungi are basically in two groups. They are either decomposers, so they're going to break down dead organisms and waste from organisms, any kind of stuff that they can get a hold of. They're going to be found all over the place with these decomposers. Very often they'll be found in the same place that you find bacteria, because they're just going to be breaking down that material and recycling it. So these guys are actually incredibly important for the plant group, because they create a lot of the nutrients for those plants in the soil. The other group are the parasites, and these parasites feed off of living tissue. So these are found in or on living organisms, and you heard me correctly. They can be in or on living organisms, and we're going to see an example of this near the end of this presentation. So then the question is, how do they feed? So the one thing that all fungi have in common, except for yeast, because they're single cells, is their structure. So all of the fungi have mycelium. So it's this structure here. If you've ever picked up a log or a rock, you may have seen this structure. If you were able to zoom in with a microscope, it would look like little microscopic threads. And they're all lapped over on top of each other. And this net is the actual fungus. So this is the actual body of the fungus, and it uses this net to spread out over top of whatever organic matter it is consuming. So you'll see this, whether they're a decomposer or a parasite, they'll spread out over top of their food source. So here, this is probably a piece of wood that this one spread out over. And what they'll do is they actually do something kind of cool. So let me grab a pencil. So you've got a cell of a fungus, and what they're going to do is they're going to send out their enzymes, like what we would use to digest. So what they do is, instead of pulling the food inside to digest it, what they do is they send out the stuff to digest it, and then they pull it back into their cell after it's digested. So they first digest outside and then ingest it. So it's kind of neat in that way. They do it the opposite of what we think of. We actually first ingest, we take it in, and then we digest it in our system. So the next thing I want to just briefly talk about is their size. So we do have the microscopic fungi, so like the yeast that we saw on that earlier slide, the contrichids, those are actually only visible under a microscope to see individuals. You can see yeast in big groups, but you can't see the individual cells. But we also have on the other end very big fungi. So what you're looking at here, these are the mushrooms of the yellow honey mushroom fungus. This has been determined to be the largest organism on the earth by area. So they did genetic testing and sampling of this organism, and were able to determine that it actually covers 4 square miles. So what you've got here is to give you an idea of how big that is. So here's the 4 square mile section, and this little red dot is the size of a football field. So that gives you some idea of scale of how big this organism is. So if you went to Oregon where this single yellow honey mushroom fungus is, would you be able to see it? And the answer is probably not, because what is making up this 4 square miles is the mycelium, that net, and it's actually mostly underground. The only part of this organism that we would see are these mushrooms when it's ready to reproduce. So this is why we actually forget about fungus, because it's mostly hidden from us. It's either under the soil, it's inside of plants, it's wrapped around the roots of plants, it's inside of organisms, inside of decomposing material. And so we don't think about these as being important because we don't see them like we see other organisms, like animals moving around or